Most people think embarrassment just happens in a moment. Like someone says something, people laugh and it's over. But what they don't realize is, moments like that are usually planned, built slowly, set up in a way where you're expected to sit there and take it. That's exactly what my dad did at my birthday dinner. He invited everyone, picked the place, waited for the perfect moment, and when he finally made that joke about me, everyone laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for it to land. What he didn't know was that I had something sitting right in my pocket that could change that entire room in less than 10 seconds. My name is Ava Reynolds, I'm 23. And welcome to Honor Unveiled, where the truth always comes out. If you're new here, subscribe. And comment where you're watching from or how long you've been here. And if this story reminds you of someone, share it with them. Now here's the part people don't see. That joke wasn't random. It was leading somewhere. The story really started a few hours before we even got to the restaurant, because by the time I sat down at that table, the tone of the night had already been decided in ways I didn't fully realize yet. My dad had insisted on organizing everything himself, which wasn't unusual on the surface, but the way he did it this time felt different, more controlled, like he wasn't just planning a dinner, he was setting up a moment. He picked a place that was nicer than what we usually go for, invited a mix of family and a couple of his close friends, and made sure everyone knew it was my night. But something about that phrasing didn't sit right with me because it sounded less like a celebration and more like a stage being prepared. When we got there, everything looked perfect, the kind of setup where nothing feels out of place, but at the same time, nothing feels completely natural either. People were smiling, greeting me, saying happy birthday, and I responded the way you're supposed to in those situations, polite, relaxed, not reading too much into anything at first. But after a few minutes, I started noticing the small things, the kind of details that don't stand out immediately but start to matter once you connect them. The way my dad was guiding conversations, keeping certain topics going while quickly shifting away from others. The way he would occasionally glance in my direction like he was waiting for the right moment to bring something up. At one point, one of his friends asked me what I'd been working on lately, and before I could even answer properly, my dad jumped in with a light laugh and said, "She's still figuring things out," like it was a harmless comment, but it carried just enough weight to shape how the conversation moved after that. Everyone smiled, some nodded, and I played along because pushing back in that moment would have turned it into something bigger than it needed to be. But that was the first time I felt it clearly. This wasn't just a dinner. It was building toward something. And the longer we sat there, the more that feeling stayed with me, not strong enough to call out, but too clear to ignore, like a quiet signal that something was about to happen and I just hadn't seen it yet. It didn't happen right away, and that's what made it land the way it did, because the night had already been going on long enough for everyone to settle in, for conversations to feel comfortable, for the atmosphere to feel relaxed and normal. Then at one point my dad leaned back slightly in his chair, smiled and said, "All right, I think it's time I say something." And the way he said it wasn't serious, it sounded light, like this was just going to be a simple birthday comment, something people would laugh at and move on from. Everyone turned toward him without being asked, the conversations around the table naturally faded, and just like that, the focus shifted. He started off exactly how you'd expect, talking about how fast time had gone by, mentioning a few small memories, the kind of things that sound warm on the surface, the kind of setup that makes people feel like they're about to hear something meaningful. And for a second I thought that's where it was going to stay. But then the tone shifted, not in a loud or obvious way, just enough to change how the words felt. He laughed lightly and said something along the lines of how I've always been trying different things, how I'm still figuring life out, and how he just hopes that one day I'll finally land on something real. People at the table laughed. Not in a cruel way. Not loudly. But enough. Enough for the moment to settle in. Because comments like that don't need to be aggressive to be effective, they just need to be public. I could feel the shift immediately, the way people looked at me slightly differently after that, not judging exactly but reassessing, like the tone of the night had just been quietly redefined in a few sentences. And the part that mattered most wasn't even what he said. It was how easily he said it. Like it was already true. Like it didn't need to be questioned. I didn't interrupt him, and I didn't react in a way that would turn the moment into something bigger. Because that's usually what people expect when they say something like that in front of others. They expect you to defend yourself. They expect you to argue. And that gives them control of the conversation. So I didn't do that. I just sat there, listened, and let the moment fully land, because sometimes the strongest response isn't immediate. Sometimes it's timed. And as he finished speaking and people started to settle back into their seats, still smiling, still thinking it was just a harmless joke, I realized something very clearly. This wasn't random. This was the moment he had been setting up the entire night. I didn't react the way people expect in moments like that, and that's exactly why the room stayed the way it was for a few seconds longer, because when someone puts you in that position publicly, they're usually waiting for you to push back, to explain yourself, to defend your choices in a way that keeps the attention exactly where they want it. But I didn't do any of that. I let the moment sit there. I let the laughter fade on its own, and I watched how the room settled, how people slowly went back to their drinks, their conversations, but with that slight shift still in the air, like something had just been decided about me without me saying a word. And that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about a joke. This was about control. About shaping how everyone in that room saw me, using a few simple lines that sounded harmless but carried just enough weight to stick. So instead of interrupting that or trying to correct it right away, I did the opposite. I leaned back slightly, reached for my phone on the table, and unlocked it calmly, not in a rushed or defensive way, just like I was checking something normal, something unrelated to the conversation that had just happened. No one paid attention to it at first. Why would they? From the outside, it looked like I had accepted the moment, like I didn't have anything to say, like the joke had landed exactly the way it was supposed to. And that's exactly what I needed. Because while they thought the moment was over, for me it was just starting. I wasn't opening my phone to scroll or distract myself. I was opening something specific. Something I had been working on quietly for months. Something I hadn't talked about at that table, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to until the right moment. And as I held the phone in my hand, scrolling for just a second to the exact screen I needed, I already knew what was about to happen next. Not because I was hoping it would work, but because I knew exactly what I was about to show them. I didn't make a scene, and I didn't try to pull attention back in a loud way, because the point wasn't to compete with what had just happened, it was to replace it with something real. I turned my phone slightly toward the table, just enough for the people closest to me to see it first, and for a second nothing happened because no one knew what they were looking at yet. Then one of my dad's friends leaned in a little closer, his expression changing almost immediately, not dramatically but enough to shift the attention of the person next to him. And within a few seconds, the focus at the table moved back toward me without me asking for it. On the screen was my Stripe dashboard. Not a random number. Not something vague. A full breakdown of my online business revenue. $312,480. Earned in the last 11 months. Every payment listed. Every client invoice. Every transaction time-stamped and verified. Undeniable. I didn't rush to explain it because I didn't need to. The numbers were doing that on their own, the same way his words had done a minute ago, but this time, there was no interpretation needed. I slightly zoomed in on the total, just enough so everyone could read it clearly, and then I tapped into one of the contracts, a signed client agreement worth $48,000, showing the payment schedule and confirmation. That's when the room changed. Not slowly this time. Immediately. Because a few seconds ago I was the one figuring things out, the one who hadn't landed on anything real. And now, they were looking at proof that didn't match that story at all. I looked up, not at everyone, just at my dad for a second, and kept my tone calm, like this wasn't even a confrontation, just a correction. "You were right," I said almost casually. "I needed something real." Then I turned the phone slightly more toward him so he could see it clearly. "This is what I've been working on." That was it. No speech. No argument. Because I didn't need one anymore. For a few seconds after I said that, no one spoke, and this time the silence didn't feel awkward or uncertain. It felt heavy, like the entire room was recalibrating around something they hadn't expected to see. The same people who had laughed just a minute ago were now looking at my phone, then at me, then back at the screen again, trying to process how both versions of that moment could exist so close together. My dad didn't react immediately. He leaned forward slightly, his expression tightening just enough to show that he was reading every detail now. Not casually, not dismissively, but carefully, like he needed to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding what he was seeing. And the more he looked at it, the clearer it became that there was nothing to reinterpret. The numbers were there. The contracts were there. The proof was complete. One of his friends spoke first, asking how long I had been doing this, and even the way he asked it had changed because it wasn't coming from curiosity anymore, it was coming from recognition. I answered simply, not turning it into a long explanation, just giving the timeline clearly, explaining that I had been building it quietly, step by step, without making it a topic of conversation at the table. My sister, who had barely paid attention earlier, was now fully engaged, asking about clients, about how the payments worked, about how I scaled it, and for the first time that night, it felt like people weren't forming opinions about me, they were asking questions about something real. And my dad. He tried to speak, but the timing wasn't there anymore. Because whatever he was going to say next had to fit what everyone had just seen, and there wasn't an easy way to bring the moment back to where it had been before. He said something about how he didn't know it was at that level, trying to adjust, trying to reframe what he had said earlier, but it didn't carry the same weight anymore. Not because it was wrong, but because it was late. And that's what changed everything. A few minutes ago he was defining me in front of everyone. Now, no one was looking to him for that anymore. After that moment the dinner didn't end, but it didn't continue the same way either, because once something real like that is seen in a room, it changes how every conversation after it feels, even if no one says it directly. People didn't go back to the same topics. They didn't circle around the same ideas about what I was doing or where I was headed. Instead, the tone shifted completely, and you could feel it in the kind of questions people started asking, not surface level anymore, not polite curiosity, but actual interest, the kind that comes when someone realizes there's more there than they thought. One of my dad's friends asked how I got my first client. Another asked how I managed payments and scaled the work, and I answered them simply, not turning it into a presentation, just explaining it in a way that made sense without trying to prove anything beyond what they had already seen. And the more the conversation moved in that direction, the clearer the shift became. A few minutes ago I was being talked about. Now, I was being listened to. My sister stayed engaged the entire time, asking questions that actually built on what I said instead of repeating assumptions. And even the people who hadn't said much earlier were now paying attention in a different way, like they were recalibrating how they saw me in real time. And my dad. He didn't try to take control of the conversation again. Not because he couldn't, but because there wasn't a natural way to do it anymore without forcing it. He stayed quieter than before, responding when spoken to, listening more than leading, and every now and then I could feel him looking at me differently, not in a dramatic way but in that subtle way that shows something has shifted internally. No one brought the joke up again. No one needed to. Because it didn't fit anymore. And that's what made the moment complete, not the numbers, not the reaction, but the fact that everything that came after it aligned with something real instead of something assumed. That night didn't turn into an argument. And honestly, that's what made it more powerful than anything else that could have happened, because there was no need to prove anything twice once the truth had already been seen. We stayed at the table for a while longer, but everything about that moment had already settled into place in a way that didn't need to be explained out loud. When we finally got up to leave, my dad walked beside me toward the parking lot, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything, not because there was nothing to say, but because the kind of moment we had just gone through doesn't need immediate words to be understood. Then he stopped for a second and looked at me, not in the same way he had earlier that night, not with assumptions, not with quiet judgment, but with something closer to recognition. I didn't know it was at that level, he said. Simple. No long explanation. No excuses. Just a statement that carried more weight now than anything he had said at that table before. And I nodded, not turning it into a speech, not trying to make the moment bigger than it needed to be, because the point was never to win an argument. The point was to be seen. Clearly. And that had already happened. On the drive home, I thought about how easily moments like that can go the other way, How quickly someone can define you in front of others if you let the moment control you instead of controlling the timing yourself. Because if I had reacted right away, if I had argued at the table, if I had tried to explain myself while everyone was still looking at him for direction, it would have just turned into noise. But by waiting, by letting the moment build, and then showing something real, the entire story changed without me needing to force it. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone tries to define you in front of others, where they say something with confidence about a version of you that doesn't match reality, don't rush to correct them. Don't fight for attention in a moment they control. Build something real. Wait for the right moment. And when it comes, show it. Because once people see the truth for themselves, you won't need to say much at all. Build something real. And let the proof speak. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Honor Unveiled for more.